Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the registration hall of the Kepler Racing Consortium, her magnetic flight boots clicking against the polished titanium floor with each deliberate step. Around her, beings from across the galaxy glided, floated, or phased through the air using their various bio-neural enhancement systems. The crystalline Vexi representative didn't even possess a physical form in the traditional sense. Its consciousness inhabited a shimmering geometric construct that pulsed with prismatic light. You want to register for the Void Run? The registration. Android's optical sensors flickered with what Elena could only interpret as digital amusement. With ... those? Its mechanical arm gestured toward her boots. Elena's boots were a marvel of human, engineering magnetized saws that could interface with any metallic surface, pressure sensors that could detect the slightest ship vibration, and neural feedback. Systems that transmitted tactile information directly to her nervous system. To her, they were precision instruments. To the galaxy, they were relics. The entry fee is 50,000 galactic credits, the android continued, its voice carrying the subtle mockery programmed by its creators. Oh, I should warn you, Captain. Vasquez, the Void Run isn't a simulation. Real pilots die in the quantum storms. Elena slapped her credit chip on the counter harder than necessary. Real pilots also know how to feel their ships beneath their feet. The hall fell silent. A group of Menthry pilots beings, whose consciousness could split across multiple vessels, simultaneously turned their collective attention toward her. Their leader, a tall figure whose skin shimmered like liquid mercury, approached with movements that seemed to bend space itself. The human thinks her ... footwear ... gives her an advantage? The Menthry's voice resonated from multiple dimensional frequencies. How quaint. Tell me, primitive one, how do your crude appendages compare to direct neural interfacing? Can your boots process terabytes of navigational data per microsecond? Elena met the alien's gaze without flinching. Can your neural interface tell you when your ship is about to tear apart from stress fractures? Can it feel the microgravitational shifts that warn of spatial anomalies? My crude appendages have kept me alive through 17 combat tours and 43 deep space rescues. The Menthry laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Combat tours. How ... military. The Void Run isn't about survival, human. It's about transcendence. It's about becoming one with velocity itself. Maybe that's your problem? Elena replied, turning back to the registration android. You've transcended so far beyond the basics that you've forgotten what flying actually feels like. As she completed her registration, Elena could hear the whispers spreading through the hall in dozens of languages. The human with the primitive footwear thinks she can compete. Someone should warn her family. This will be over before it begins. Elena smiled grimly. Let them underestimate her. She'd built her entire career on proving skeptics wrong, one impossible flight at a time. 3 days before the race, Elena found herself in the Nebula Bar, a dimly lit establishment that catered to pilots from the Outer Rim colonies. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing famous races and crashes, and the air hummed with the nervous energy of beings who made their living defying death at light speed. You're either the bravest human I've ever met, or the most suicidal. The voice belonged to Marcus Chun, a fellow human pilot whose ship, the Terran Defiance, was docked 3 berths away from Elena's vessel. His own magnetic boots were scuffed and battle-worn, bearing the marks of countless emergency repairs performed in zero gravity. Elena raised her synthetic whiskey in salute. What's the difference anymore? We're the last species still flying. Manual, Marcus. Everyone else has gone neural, bio-integrated, or consciousness merged. We're the dinosaurs of the racing circuit. Dinosaurs who keep winning battles, added Dr. Sarah Kim from across the table. Sarah wasn't a pilot. but as xenobiologist who studied the physiological effects of high-speed travel on different species, I've been analyzing the data from the preliminary trials. The neural-linked pilots are faster in straight lines, but their reaction times actually decrease when faced with unpredictable variables. Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of variables? Quantum storms, gravitational anomalies, ship malfunctions, anything that requires improvisation rather than calculation. The neural links create a dependency on processed data. When that data becomes unreliable or contradictory, they freeze. Elena nodded slowly. While we ugly boot-wearing humans just adapt. Exactly. Your primitive systems, the physical controls, the tactile feedback, the spatial awareness developed through actual bodily movement. They're not primitive at all. They're fundamental. The other species have built elaborate technological solutions. On top of basic piloting skills they've forgotten entirely. A commotion near the bar's entrance drew their attention. A group of Vex-High had entered, their crystalline forms refracting the ambient light into rainbow patterns. They moved with the fluid grace of beings who had never needed to consider physical limitations, and their leader, a towering construct of living diamond, approached Elena's table with obvious intent. Captain Vasquez. The Vex-High's voice resonated like struck crystal. I am Resonance of Perfect Velocity, current holder of the Galactic speed record. I wish to meet the human who believes primitive footwear can compete with crystalline perfection. Elena stood, her boots firmly planted on the deck. Nice to meet you, Resonance. Though I have to ask, when's the last time you actually flew a ship instead of becoming one? The question caught the alien off guard. Its crystalline structure flickered. Uncertainly. The distinction is meaningless. To fly is to become. To become is to transcend physical limitations. But what happens when transcendence meets a problem it can't compute its way out of? Elena's question hung in the air like a challenge. Vex-High's form brightened dangerously. I suppose we shall discover the answer in 3 days, Captain. May your primitive methods serve you well in the void. As the aliens departed, Marcus whistled low. You just declared war on the fastest being in the galaxy. Elena grinned, feeling the reassuring weight of her boots against the deck. No, I just reminded him that speed without substance is just falling with style. Asterisk, the starting line of the Void Run stretched across a 3-dimensional grid in open space, with 27 pilots from 15 different species preparing for what many considered the most dangerous race in the galaxy. Elena's ship, the Human Spirit, looked positively archaic compared to the sleek biovessels and energy constructs of her competitors. Where others had smooth, organic curves or crystalline perfection, her ship bore the angular pragmatism of human, engineering every surface designed for function rather than aesthetic transcendence. Pilots, prepare for quantum fold initiation, announced the race coordinator, a vast AI consciousness that existed purely as distributed energy throughout the starting grid. The course will take you through the Maelstrom Nebula, past the collapsing binary system of Thanatos 7, and through the Omega Rift. First pilot to reach the beacon beyond the rift claims victory and the galactic speed record. Elena ran through her pre-flight checks with methodical precision. Her boots interfaced with the ship's systems through direct contact points on the deck, allowing her to feel the fusion core's rhythm, the structural stress patterns, and the subtle vibrations that indicated optimal performance. Around her, other pilots were already merging consciousness with their vessels, their physical forms becoming translucent as they transcended individual existence. The starting klaxon echoed through space, and 27 ships launched toward the swirling chaos of the Maelstrom Nebula. Within seconds, Elena found herself trailing the pack as the neural-linked pilots achieved velocities that should have torn their ships apart. But as they entered the nebula's outer edge, where quantum storms raged with unpredictable fury, The advantage began to shift. The first casualty was a Menthry pilot whose consciousness, spread across multiple sensor arrays, couldn't process the contradictory data streaming from the storm's chaotic quantum fluctuations. Elena watched through her view screen as the alien's ship began spinning wildly, its pilot unable to distinguish between real and phantom sensor readings. Human spirit to distressed vessel, Elena broadcast. Cut your neural links and engage manual. Override. The response came back in fractured Menthry. Cannot ... process ... reality matrix ... unstable. Alana cursed and altered course toward the spinning ship, her boots automatically adjusting to compensate for the gravitational anomalies around them. While other pilots raced ahead, focused solely on speed, Elena guided the confused Menthry to a stable trajectory, using nothing but verbal instructions and her own ship's physical presence as a reference point. "Why do you stop?" the confused alien asked as Elena guided them to safety behind an asteroid. "Because sometimes the race isn't about being first," Elena replied. "It's about being human." As she rejoined the race, Elena noticed something the others had missed. The quantum storms weren't random. They followed patterns, subtle rhythms that could only be detected through direct physical sensation rather than digital analysis. Her boots picked up the vibrations. Her hands felt the steering column's response to gravitational shifts, and her inner ear detected acceleration changes that no sensor could measure. While the remaining neural-linked pilots fought their way through the chaos with brute computational force, Elena danced through the storms like she was born to fly in impossible conditions. By the time they reached the Thanatos 7 system, she had moved from last place to fifth, and the gap was closing. But the real test was still ahead, the Omega Rift, where space itself twisted into geometric impossibilities, and where the only way forward was to trust instinct over intellect. The Omega Rift defied conventional physics at P. Wound in spacetime, where reality folded back on itself in patterns that made navigation computers crash and neural interfaces overload with paradoxical data. Elena approached the Rift's event horizon in fourth place, watching as the three leading pilots, Du Vex High and a Quantum evolved. Nexari struggled with their bio-integrated systems. Warning: spatial geometry inconsistent with navigational parameters, announced Elena's ship computer in its matter-of-fact human voice. Recommend immediate course correction. Computer, switch to manual flight mode and disable all automated navigation systems. Elena commanded, her boots finding purchase on the deck as gravitational forces from the rift began affecting her ship. Captain, manual navigation through. The Omega Rift has a survival probability of, I don't want to know the odds. Just give me engine control and keep the fusion core stable. Elena's hands gripped the physical flight controls, devices that other species had abandoned centuries ago as primitive relics. But as the rift's impossible geometry began warping space around her ship, those primitive controls became her salvation. While the neural-linked pilots ahead of her received contradictory sensor data that paralyzed their augmented minds, Elena flew by field. Her boots detected micro-vibrations in the deck that indicated spatial stress patterns. Her hands felt the ship's response to the rift's gravitational eddies through the steering column's feedback. Most importantly, her unaugmented human brain could process the impossible without trying to make logical sense of it. The lead Vex High pilot, Resonance of Perfect Velocity, was the first to fall victim to the rift's paradoxes. Elena watched through her view screen as the crystalline being's perfect form began stuttering between dimensional states, its consciousness unable to reconcile the contradictory data it was receiving from its bio-neural interface. Human spirit to resonance of perfect velocity, Elena broadcast. Disconnect from your ship's navigation matrix and fly manually. Impossible, came the crystalline voice, now fractured and uncertain. Manual flight is ... primitive ... inefficient. It's also the only thing that works when perfection meets paradox. Elena replied, already pulling ahead of the struggling alien. Sometimes you need to get your hands dirty. The second Vex-High pilot tried to follow Elena's example, but discovered that their species had evolved so far beyond physical manipulation that they no longer possessed the spatial awareness necessary for manual flight. The Nexari pilot, whose consciousness existed as pure quantum probability, simply phased out of normal space entirely when faced with the rift's contradictions. Elena found herself in the lead as she navigated deeper into the Omega Rift, using techniques that predated galactic civilization. When her instruments showed her flying through solid matter, she trusted her inner ear's balance sensors. When gravity seemed to pull in 6 directions simultaneously, she followed the subtle pressure. Changes her boots detected in the deck plating. When space itself twisted into Mobius strips and Klein bottles, she flew the same way her ancestors had navigated by stars, using intuition, experience, and the fundamental connection between pilot and machine. Behind her, she could hear radio chatter as the remaining pilots struggled with system failures and sensory overload. The ones who survived were those who could shut down their advanced neural interfaces and revert to basic manual controls, but none of them had the decades of training that Elena possessed in primitive flight techniques. As she emerged from the worst of the rift's distortions, Elena realized she was alone in the lead, with the finish line beacon visible in the distance. But more importantly, she had proven something that the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes the most advanced technology was knowing when to trust the simplest tools. Her magnetic boots, mocked as primitive footwear, had literally kept her grounded, while others lost themselves in transcendent complexity. Elena crossed the finish line 17 minutes ahead of the second-place finisher, shattering the previous galactic speed record by an unprecedented margin. But as she guided the human spirit toward the finish beacon, she discovered something that made her victory pale in comparison to its implications. The beacon wasn't just a race marker, it was an ancient artifact, older than any known galactic civilization. As Elena's ship approached, her primitive magnetic boots detected vibrations in the deck that her instruments couldn't explain. The artifact was responding to her presence, specifically to her method of piloting. Human spirit, this is race control, came the transmission from the Kepler Racing Consortium. Congratulations on your victory, Captain Vasquez. However, we're detecting unusual energy readings from the finish beacon. Please maintain distance until we can analyze. The transmission cut off as the beacon began projecting a holographic message in a language that predated modern galactic script. Elena's ship computer worked frantically to translate, but it was Dr. Sarah Kim, monitoring from the Nebula Bar, who broke the code first. Elena, that message, it's not random. It's a test protocol. The artifact has been waiting eons for a pilot. Who could navigate the Omega Rift using direct physical interface rather than neural processing? As the translation became clear, Elena's heart raced. The message revealed that the ancient civilization that created the beacon had faced a crisis, similar to the current galactic situation: overdependence on neural technology that left them vulnerable when their advanced systems failed. They had hidden vital information about surviving an approaching cosmic catastrophe, information that could only be accessed by pilots who maintained the primitive connection between consciousness, body, and machine. Captain Vasquez came. A new transmission, this one from Resonance of Perfect Velocity, who had managed to complete the race in 3rd place after learning to disconnect from their bioneural systems. It appears your primitive methods were not so primitive after all. The revelation sent shockwaves through the galactic community. The very technology that had allowed various species to transcend their physical limitations had also made them dependent on systems that could fail at critical moments. The ancient warning spoke of a coming quantum cascade, phenomenon that would render all neural interface technology inoperative, leaving only those with manual piloting skills capable of navigating space safely. Within days of Alana's victory, the Galactic Confederation began implementing mandatory manual flight training for all pilots. The mocking term primitive footwear became a badge of honor, and human flight instructors found themselves in unprecedented demand across the galaxy. Ilana's greatest satisfaction came from a private message she received from Marcus Chun. Looks like the dinosaurs inherited the stars after all. Standing on the observation deck of the Kepler station, Elena looked out at the stars through the transparent aluminum viewport. Her magnetic boots were firmly planted on the deck, feeling the subtle vibrations of the station's rotation, the thrum of its fusion reactors, and the gentle gravitational fluctuations from nearby celestial bodies. These weren't primitive sensations, they were fundamental connections to the physical universe that no amount of technological transcendence could replace. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the most advanced solution was remembering why the simple ones worked in the first place. And sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. Asterisk, asterisk.